Welcome back, everyone. We're ready to start with the Fireside chat. We have our two panelists on board. I will quickly introduce the moderator for today. We have Jaidev with us. Jaidev is a full-stack data scientist who specializes in building ML and AI products. He's currently serving as the Associate Director of Tech at Gramener. He also teaches programming and ML in various universities and e-learning programs. It's really great to have Jaidev here, and we cannot wait for him to start with both our panelists on board. So can we start with a big round of applause for both our panelists and Jaidev?
Thanks a lot. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. We have Sharmista, who is an evangelist and a researcher. We also have with us Ram, who has spent a lot of time at IBM and now he does his own thing. And we're going to have this panel on ethics and responsible AI. We have a fair amount of ground to cover. So I wonder if it would be okay to accept questions at any time, or would you prefer it one at a time?
I am fine with it.
And I trust we have mics going around in the audience? Okay, great. So one of the most pertinent questions that personally I have whenever it comes to evaluating anything, whether it is a technology or not, is that we probably don't have the vocabulary to do it. Right? When we talk about ethics, ethics are an inherently human thing. Machines don't have them, and so on. But I'd like to start with a vague book recommendation. In fact, there's a book called Technopoly by Neil Postman, which I read earlier this year, and he's a cultural critic, he was, and he draws a very fine distinction between three kinds of technological progress. The first kind is what he calls simply tool-using cultures, people who use technology as tools. So simply we know that certain tools have certain specific tasks, and that's their place in that society. When that proliferates, or if it is left unchecked, a tool-using culture becomes a technocracy, where tools become the culture. They are part of the culture, or they sort of start taking over the culture itself. And when that is left unchecked, they become a technocracy, where the tools and the technology becomes more important than the culture itself. So I find that this is a suitable framework for categorizing technological progress and maybe even critiquing it to a certain extent. And as I was thinking about this, one of the first things that came to my mind was that the code of conduct here at PyCon is taken fairly seriously. Do you think that if we were to feed every spoken and written word in these 2 days to an LLM, it would be able to spot code of conduct violations?
I'll take that question.
Please.
It is your question is an open-ended question, but I will take it as two assumptions here. One is, if you had asked this question in 2023 PyCon, then we would have had all the COC data put into an LLM, and now we could actually, people could start writing or typing into the LLM, and then you could see some results coming in. That's one scenario. The second scenario is, if you started it now, and you're actually using that LLM now, and you're actually feeding the data, assuming that COC related data is also there into the LLM, then I would say not use an LLM. I would say use an SLM, small language model. The reason, if you have an LLM, and if the data set that is using to operate or feed onto the LLM is not comparatively bigger, then a SLM will give you lesser bias compared to an LLM, because LLM becomes broad-based. Yeah. So when LLM is broad-based, when the content or the data on which it is actually trained is comparatively lesser, the result is going to be very widespread. And when the result is very widespread, it is not very specific. And when it is not very specific, it may not give bias, but it may start hallucinating. So I think the best thing to do, if you want to do our COC data into the LLM, I would not use an LLM, but I will use an SLM. So that will reduce the bias. It will also reduce the hallucination.
You're perhaps simplifying the problem also in that, because of course, I mean, COC biases aren't really deeply inherent or something like that. It's just I accidentally, or maybe not accidentally, but I might have used a racial slur or a sexist word or something like that. And regardless of the context, it is a violation. So that's why SLMs could work just as well.
SLMs. And one more reason.
Or even better, in fact.
Correct. And one more reason is, what happens is that, see, this bias, what we are talking about, it is, people write a lot of things, they talk a lot of things about eliminating bias in an LLM or SLM. I have a counterintuitive argument for that. You cannot completely eliminate bias in any system, because bias is a survival tool. Let me give an example. You're walking in a forest, okay? There is a lion coming in front of you. You cannot assume that the lion is not hungry, therefore it is not going to attack me. Your first thing should be, survival bias should be, a lion is coming, irrespective of whether the lion is hungry or the lion is not hungry, I need to first find the escape route. So what I am saying is, bias cannot be eliminated 100%. Those kind of LLMs never work, because in a social setup or in a cultural setup, a little bit of bias is required to make sure that it is aligned to the cultural and the societal norms of the place where the data is in. For example, Japan. If you go somebody and tip somebody in Japan, it is known as, it's not a good thing. They say it is infra-dig, below their dignity, to tip somebody in a Japan restaurant. But that is not going to happen in Australia. In Australia, if you go to a restaurant and there's a waiter, you are supposed to tip. Culturally, it's not a compulsory. So what I'm saying is, bias has to be eliminated completely. It's not possible, it will not work. Bias has to be calibrated, bias has to be reduced as much as
Kept
possible.
in check, yeah. So Sharmishta, what do you think about that? But basically, what I gather, it's a truly neutral model will barely be functional. But what do you think?
Yeah, so SLMs, what you said, right? Small language models, that not only helps your cost, but helps you to deploy even in your own laptop. The most important thing I would say, that create a metadata out of the regional biases that you are expecting. Create a metadata hub based on societal norms and incorporating the biases that may come every day. And then use the small language models, evaluate the small language models, and have your visualizations, your interpretability framework ready, that what are the expectations for your groundedness, relevancy, context relevance, answer relevance, and how much bias that you are expecting, the calibrations. Have the ground results ready. And then on top of it, when you get certain unknown data, how much you are deviating from the expected and accepted thresholds. How much is your tolerance amount?
So this is what we call guardrails, if I'm not wrong,
Yes.
right? Is that correct?
There are different types of guardrails you can implement on top of that, Nemo guardrails, that you can check for different types of keywords that are getting into that somebody, say in a banking, like you have credit card information you are asking. So you won't give that, LLM won't give. That is a kind of a guardrail. For societal norms, you have slangs versus sometimes societal languages that people, colloquial languages use.
Right. Like,
What is
don't
your
assume that a
acceptance?
female doctor is a nurse or something like that. Yeah.
So what is the acceptance that you would be tolerating into the LLM, and what is that guardrail that you are going to implement? Whether it is terms-wise, language-wise, toxicity-wise, what do you say, like ambiguity, how much you would tolerate, how much generous you are, how much you are acceptable to different cultures and faiths. So there are different terms that how you accept those tolerance limits for different types of words or keywords or sentences that you feed in. And once you set the ground, you should have your interpretability very clear. That is my ground level, and this is what. And over top of it, if you can put your embedding metrics, what was the previous session, it makes it very clear that how much your LLM will be actually pass through your lot of regulators, and it won't. And
so it seems like there's a lot of looking within that is in order before we even do something like this. But then guardrails or such things, they seem, at least to me, reactive, in the sense that you train your LLM on whatever is available and then worry about all of this. Do you think it's reasonable or even imaginable that fairness and bias metrics I'm talking about cultural and societal bias, of course, obviously, are built into the training system itself. You are being proactive, not reactive to it. Does this make sense, or are we daydreaming?
You can build in, but the other thing what you can do is at your hand as an engineer in our heart, prompt engineering.
Yeah.
There you filter it. That is the level of filter that you can add. And don't let it. There and there you say that it is not, the model is not able to answer, and it is not within your permissible range that you can go inside the LLM. Have the AI filters, AI firewalls in. So that kind of entries, when you're questioning those in an enterprise setup, that doesn't get into.
What has been your experience in terms of being proactive in terms of eliminating not eliminating, you know what I mean?
Very good question. Actually, let me tell you something. The LLM problems are not the model or algorithm problems. I have a formula for that. 60 plus 20 plus 10 plus 10. When I talk of responsibility, 60% is a data problem. I say that LLM problems or bias problems or hallucination problems are data engineering problems. So 60%, if you have control over the data, when I say data engineering problems, I am talking about the upstream where the data is collected, data is collated, data is curated, and then fed into the model. If you put guardrails there, 60% of your problems of bias and hallucination is taken care of. Correct. That's the first 60%. The remaining 20% is the algorithm or the model. So you have something called as fairness algorithms. There is something called as weights and biases, which you tamper with or you make changes in the algorithm. So that's the 20%. The next 10% is a human in the loop. You can have the greatest of algorithms in this world. You can have the most curated data sets in the world. It's still garbage in and garbage out. You can have AI or LLM or whatever you call in the world. You put in garbage, LLM will very nicely give out a garbage. So the 10% human in the loop is very important. And the remaining 10% is monitoring and observability. So if you follow the 60 plus 20 plus 10 plus 10, you're actually controlling your bias. That's why I'm using the word controlling, not eliminating.
Yeah.
Controlling your bias, and you manage the hallucinations better. Again, hallucination also, you cannot completely eliminate it. The vector, what we are using, embeddings are not enough. You'll have to use knowledge graphs. Along with vectors, the knowledge graphs, the KGs have to be incorporated. A lot of research is happening in that area. So finally, what I'm trying to say is that most of the problems are guardrails has to happen at the data collection level. And nowadays you have something called as ontology. Ontology is basically how you collect the data and you are actually forming a semantic layer on top of that. So you're not going to use the data into the LLM directly. You have to create a semantic layer, and that semantic layer gets created by using knowledge graphs. So during data collection,
that's very interesting, because that reminded me of the 90s or something, when this ontologies and knowledge graphs were at the forefront of NLP.
yes.
And the whole reason why we are doing all of this is to get rid of that, and now we're coming back to that.
Yes.
History repeats itself. Yeah. All right.
And do the regular data audits. Bring in those people who are the responsible, who works closely with the regulations, who knows what are the regulatory checks for different countries are there. Because it may be different for India versus
Absolutely.
India.
Yeah.
So bring in those bring their perspectives, have the regular monitoring. And anything when you ingest, the real-time monitoring can give the alerts that this is not what we are expecting. Even data leakages. If you're missing the data coming in real-time pipelines, that will definitely give you something on the other in the model. Whatever you ingest, you get it out, garbage in, garbage out.
So interesting that you spoke about regulations. One of the things that, of course, we are evolving as the technology evolves and we sort of react to it. But legally, are AI models equivalent to other kind of software in terms of, software is typically thought of as works of literature. Copyright and IPR are treated pretty much the same way as books or poetry or anything like that. What is AI? Is it, from a regulatory or a legal perspective, is it simply software or is it more?
It's more than that. So India is yet to come up with a regulatory act like that is already been done in Europe. And for Europe, the most important thing, the accountability. Who is developing the software? And if my software gives or some incorrect results, who is going to be at the end of the day getting accountable? Is the organization or the individual?
Yeah.
Imply that this may look very simple for a data scientist. My model is accurate by 70%. But what if you are denying a loan, saying that because there are inaccuracies, you are denying a loan to someone, and you're saying my model is 70% time I'm predicting right, but 30% time you're telling incorrect, you're giving incorrect results, and you may be denying a loan to a person, you may be denying a telephone connection to a person. What more? You may be denying car services to a person, because your model is only 30% inaccurate. Now, how do you bake in those areas or correct those areas? Who is accountable for that? So even if you are denying that loan, do you have an interpretability framework that you can suggest that because the gender is, because the annual income is, or because the qualification of the individual is beyond, is below the certain threshold that the model is expecting, you are denying it. And maybe that your customer care professionals of the bank work with hand in hand with the individuals and explain them, maybe this is the area where we think it is not working out.
Yeah.
Please
Let's
get back
take,
to
in
us.
fact, along those lines, a concrete example. Let us say that, I end up fine-tuning an LLM on a particularly toxic subreddit. Who is accountable? Me or Reddit?
Okay, so Reddit is not accountable. Each one of us are accountable when it comes to responsible AI. Because Reddit is going to put it in the social media or it is there. But it's your job to ensure that
I filter properly.
Yeah, filter it out. See, that's why I said there is a human in the loop.
Yeah.
Everything cannot happen with technology. The technology has to go in conjunction with the human in the loop.
Right.
Just want to add on your question on what Sharmista said. There is something called a sovereign AI, which is happening in the world
Sovereign
now.
AI?
Sovereign AI.
Oh, wow. Okay. What is that?
Like nations have a nuclear doctrine. Like nations
first
have,
use.
like nations have military doctrine. Nations now need to have a sovereign AI doctrine, because AI is an asset. It's a national asset. It's a geopolitical tool. So when you're talking about IP, when you're talking about privacy, IP as a software, it is being taken now as an IP. Data need not be IP, because data can be sourced from open source or external thing. But the models or the algorithm that has been used, those needs to be IP. For example, if you look at Australia has a sovereign AI. Australia says, if I am implementing sovereign AI, your data also has to be from Australia. Your model, your algorithm, your infrastructure, your cloud, everything has to be in Australia. So now the countries are trying to make sure that this LLM, which was actually a borderline between what you call a proprietary software or a not proprietary software, the countries are coming up with legislation saying that no, it's a proprietary software.
It is proprietary.
Yeah. For example, recently there was a LLM released called Kangaroo LLM. Australia is doing a lot on sovereign AI. In fact, I was training them on one of the things. So there, the Kangaroo LLM will actually, the bot, the web scroller, is going to go for 77 to 80,000 of only Australian websites, get the data, and then the model runs on that and generates unique insights. So everything is controlled by the government, in the sense that the data is in Australia, Australian data, the privacy rules are Australia's, the insights that is generating LLMs are generating for Australia, and it is generated using the models which have been patented or which has been IP'd by Australia itself.
Got it. But again, not to be too pedantic, but is the foundational model also, the corresponding foundational models also Australian?
No.
So where do you draw the line then? Okay, fair enough. Do we have questions so far? Yes, please. Do we have a mic? In fact, feel free to interrupt us. Just find one of the volunteers with a mic and we'll probably reach you. Yes, please.
Suresh ma'am, I completely agree with your point, bringing in the transparency. When we're talking about loan being rejected, right? We should understand why is it being rejected. I completely agree with that. But I have a point, say, when you're talking about accountability, is it not just the person who developed the model, but I think the source of it, even they should be accountable, right? And now with the disclaimers that are coming in, say for example, mutual funds are subject to market risk. I'm not responsible for anything. So similar thing can come in when someone develops a product as well, right? So how can we actually make them accountable for that or being responsible for that?
Yeah, so as per EU, where it is heavily regulated, it has to go through, there are lawyers who are getting trained in AI.
Yep.
So I work with a few, and they want to know from all different perspectives, whether it's banking, whether it is agriculture or your retail sector, what does it mean to them, the 7 principles of responsible AI? What does it mean privacy? What it means bias or fairness or accountability or interpretability? And they are the persons who are going to come and audit your firm. Means you may be a bank, you may be a fintech, or you're an insurance company. They are going to come and audit it. So definitely your organization needs to be having a certificate that yes, this model has been passed through MRMG process, what we call model governance process. And also in the MRMG, your organization, it's not just about an individual who develops a model. There's a whole ecosystem of people who's sitting around it. The MRMG process, the engineer, the data scientists, the data engineers, the auditors, the personnel who is doing the responsible AI audits from the organization perspective, as well as the lawyer who is coming in from outside and doing the seeing the checklist.
But larger companies definitely might follow that. But whereas a startup, right, we cannot. I don't think that is possible, right?
Yes, that's why
how do we bring in that?
This has created a new business. Other startups are coming in to regulate those smaller startups who are coming up with AI models, because they cannot spend that much heavy expenses on the lawyers. We have to bring in lawyers and get it audited.
Regulatory oversight as a service.
Yes. So there are other startups who are making business out of this, helping other startups.
Thanks.
So, where do we lie? Where does India lie? Whether it is the legislative or the executive, whatever it is. Where are we, or how well poised are we to come up with our own regulatory policies or oversight? Is it a question of simply political will, or will it so happen that 20 years down the line, we'll find ourselves in a situation where we have simply conformed to global standards, which by itself is not a bad thing. But where are we then?
We had this Niti Yukta and lot of things from NASSCOM coming up with the principles and guidelines. So now it lies how quickly we can create an awareness before coming up with an act. We also have India Data Protection Act, Privacy Acts.
Yeah.
We don't have anything as now like interpretability, which is one of the main pillars. Biasness checks, we don't publish those scores.
How well do you think the Data Privacy Act serves as a base for future such initiatives?
Yeah. So your question on India, yes, India is working on it. We have the recent Niti Aayog session that happened recently. They were talking about bringing whatever you're talking about legislation in place. And on top of that, the AI mission which Indian government is running, it's also taking care of the privacy and the coming up with the AI specific act. In fact, I want to tell you that India is also coming up with a sovereign AI, like Australia has done. So there's a lot of work happening there. It's work in progress. But internationally, we do not have any standard regulation. The way, if you remember the DNS, you have the icon which takes care of the entire DNS, our internet, how the internet websites are there. So we do not have, because every country is coming up with their own AI regulation and act. Australia has it, UK has it, and then US has it, India is doing that. So there'll be a day, what will happen is all these acts are taken together, and then they are going to have an international, a kind of a regulatory body which oversees. But having said that, the best way to do is at the data level. Again, I'm saying people will not comply unless you do something in the design.
Unless the citizens...
No, that's one. One is compliance. One is how do you ensure that you put it in the design itself? And that's where I'm saying when data is collected, you run ontologies. When you create ontologies, you bake in privacy as design and security as design while collecting the data itself.
Got it. Sharmista, what are your closing thoughts?
Yeah.
Do you think this is going to have teeth eventually? Or
Eventually, we have to be very much grounded and accept the fact that we are not only helping with models, but we are also impairing people's lives. We are affecting people because the models are not maintaining all those aspects. Whether if your privacy, data privacy, you build in models, bake in differential privacy, see the application level privacy, see the security and transport layer privacy, bring in secure encryption and others. So, and test this with whatever business wants the metrics for accuracy, because responsible
economically sustainable
sustainable, because as long as you are building models but you are also baking in privacy, fairness, is going to impact your accuracy metrics.
My profit.
There's a trade-off trade-off. So how much business is acceptable to is, what are the business metrics and what is the right trade-off that has to be agreed by all the stakeholders and all your data science or data engineer professionals, and come to an acceptable trade-off that we are going to go with this. And then it should be like, when you do the audit, the stamping has to be there from an external lawyer that this is the metrics and this is how it can deviate. What is the margins that you are accepting it to deviate, and what is the impact on dollars, the MRMG process, the governance process. If this is happening, that we are prioritizing privacy, fairness, bias, then this is the impact and accuracy, and this translates to this much amount of dollars that can get a hit.
Thank you. I think we're almost out of time, but how much time do we have before the next talk? Sorry? Okay, so we can take questions for 5 minutes. There's
Okay.
Amit,
Yeah.
please go on.
This question is related to the guardrails we are talking about.
Sorry?
Guardrails.
Guardrails.
Right?
Okay.
So what is the limit of guardrails you think? Because nowadays what we have started seeing these guardrails becoming political tools. Like if you see the way the response are being coming, if you see the first version of OpenAI or the second generation, the way it is coming, if you see there are variations in the answer that we get. If you see take certain political figures also, one political figure the response is some, and depending on the other, like it is varying differently. Like we see there are bias in the response. It is not because the problem is with the model, it's the guardrails that is doing the problem. So where this is
Guardrails are
stopping.
becoming propaganda tools.
Yeah, it is becoming. When we say like guardrails, these guardrails can be
Too
anything.
much guardrails is also not needed.
So
Yeah. So see, there has to be a balance between innovation and regulation. You're talking about guardrails. Guardrails is nothing but you're trying to stifle innovation and trying to make it as a political tool. Okay. So whenever there is too much of a regulation, innovation will suffer. And whenever there is too much of, there is no regulation, innovation may happen, but it will go out of control. So this balance has to be maintained. But it's very important to know that even if you have guardrails, there has to be an oversight by an organization which is actually tracking all these guardrails and trying to see which guardrails are actually genuine and which guardrails are actually to create mischief. So this is something needed. This could be at a national level or it could be an international level. Otherwise, what happens? People come up with new models and people come up with new, very creative guardrails on top of that, and it starts being used as a political tool. So this is a constantly cat and mouse game that's happening. But there has to be a time where guardrails also has to be monitored, a leaderboard with a rating, and say these guardrails are being misused and these guardrails are the right way to use it. So always this fight between innovation and regulation. How much of innovation will stifle, or how much of regulation will stifle innovation? Or if you don't give regulation, innovation will go for a toss. If you remember recently, there was a hack happened, a deep fake hack in Hong Kong where $25 million was transferred from one person to another because the so-called CEO, deep fake CEO, came on a Zoom call and said transfer this money. Yeah. So that's the danger there.
Yeah.
We fall prey to much simpler hacks also. So every time, my CEO Anand is traveling from Singapore to India, there's a WhatsApp message which goes around asking for money.
No. The same thing happened in India. If you see during elections, we saw one such event that happened, right? The Home Minister was saying something and something got published. Yeah. It was a deep fake that we later came to know. Correct. So it's not new, like it has already started. There is a concern with this kinds of thing happening. So yeah, guardrails is needed, but my personal feeling is there should be a limit. Somebody should oversee those things. And how it can happen, like any organization that is looking after it. Like without that, it is going to be a challenge for us.
And even for the organization, it's a learning curve because it's like cybersecurity. People come up with their unique offensive security from deep web, dark web, then they keep hitting. The cybersecurity team starts creating guardrails for that. They come up with something more novel. So this is a constant cat and mouse catch-up happening.
Thank you.
We'll have to watch this space as we move ahead.
Okay, so thanks a lot. I think we are almost done. And Sarmista and please go ahead.
No, thank you. I was sitting.
Sarmista and Ram are going to be around, I hope, for the rest of the event, or at least till this evening. You're around for a while. Okay. Then you can catch them offline. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.